Hey guys, how's it going? TJ here with Dead History, and welcome back to part 2 of our next Vice Presidential Series installment as we're taking a look at the 30th Vice President of the United States, Charles Gates Dawes. Good old Charles G. Dawes, or Helen Maria Dawes, as we learned in part 1. I hope you enjoyed part 1 yesterday. I hope you enjoyed the early life and, just kind of his business life and all that sort of thing, his career in business and his rise through the ranks, his World War I service, Nobel Peace Prize, his music writing, all this sort of thing. And of course, I said yesterday in the beginning of our audio that it was just me for the audio and video portion, but I was incorrect. Henry made a guest appearance and joined us for the video portion. So very nice surprise, which was awesome. So I am solo for the audio though here for part 2. So let's jump right in and take a look and conclude our series here on our 30th Vice President, Charles G. Dawes. Here we go. The second choice for the second spot. At the Republican Convention in 1924, Calvin Coolidge was nominated without significant opposition, but the front-running candidate for vice president, Governor Loudoun, had let it be known that he did not want the second spot on the ticket. Nor did the popular Idaho Senator William E. Borah want to be the number 2 man. A story at the time recorded that President Coolidge had offered Borah a place on the ticket. For which position? Borah had supposedly replied. On the second ballot, the delegates nominated Loudoun, but he declined to run as threatened. Republican National Chairman William Butler promoted Commerce Secretary Herbert Hoover, but Hoover remained too unpopular with the farm states for his price fixing as food commissioner during the war, and the delegates on the third ballot chose Charles G. Dawes for vice president. President Coolidge, who had already sent a congratulatory note to Frank Loudoun, accepted Dawes as someone who would add strength to the campaign and who he expected would remain personally loyal to him. When the unexpected news came over the radio, Dawes was back at his birthplace of Marietta, Ohio, delivering the commencement address to his alma mater. There is one recollection I shall always treasure, he later wrote. It is of the gathering of thousands of the people of the town the next day to hear me speak briefly from the front porch of the old family home, and the church bells of the town were rung in honor of the occasion. Some people may claim that the vice presidency does not amount to much, but just then it seemed to me the greatest office in the world. During the campaign, Coolidge maintained his stance of speaking infrequently and keeping his remarks as bland and inoffensive as possible. He left it to Dawes to attack the Democratic candidate, John W. Davis, and the progressive candidate, Wisconsin Senator Robert M. La Follette. Dawes entertained his audiences with the type of Helen Maria speeches they expected, shaking his fist and denouncing La Follette, whose platform, among other things, advocated allowing Congress to overturn Supreme Court decisions. As a demagogue and dangerous radical, animated by the vicious purpose of undermining the constitutional foundation of the Republic, Dawes went so far as to suggest that La Follette was a Bolshevik, although La Follette had publicly rejected communist support and had been attacked by them. Coolidge and Dawes were overwhelmingly elected in 1924, winning more votes than the Democratic and progressive candidates combined. When Coolidge was elected president, the world desired tranquility, Dawes noted in his journal, a reaction of its people from the excesses of war. But tranquility was not Charles Dawes' style. Reading a little from another source, as with most incumbent presidents, the Coolidge nomination was virtually assured. Silent Cal left the choice of a running mate to the Republican convention. The initial choice was Illinois former Governor Frank O. Lowden, whom Dawes supported, an ardent spokesperson for the plight of the Midwestern farmer. Since the party platform on this issue was unsatisfactory to the Prairie State's ex-governor, he declined by telegraph. The party chieftains consulted about an alternative candidate while the convention recessed. Among the remaining contenders were Senator Charles Curtis of Kansas, the floor whip, Secretary of Commerce Herbert C. Hoover, and Dawes, whose chairmanship of the Reparations Commissions made him newsworthy and noteworthy. Dawes, selected on the third ballot, recorded in notes as vice president in 1935 that he gained the honor notwithstanding the efforts of the chairman of the Republican National Committee, who endeavored to unite his followers for Hoover. It is significant that Dawes was not blessed by President Coolidge. Distant, if not actually hostile, relations between the Republican standard-bearers could be forecast. In spite of possible tensions, the Republican nominees conferred in Washington on July 1st with Party Chairman William M. Butler. A campaign strategy was agreed upon with the president, partially due to inclination and partly due to Calvin Jr.'s tragic death, staying close to the White House or to Vermont. Dawes assumed the bulk of the speech-making and traveling. The content of the vice president's acceptance speech was established, and the law and order theme became the campaign's leitmotif. Dawes reported traveling 15,000 miles and making 108 speeches on behalf of the Grand Old Party. So basically, also on the campaign trail, Dawes really ignored the Democrats, John W. Davis and Charles W. Bryan. He really went after the third-party candidates, Robert M. La Follette and Burton K. Wheeler. He was especially repugnant to Dawes was that Progressive Party platform. So he really went after them. And another one of the themes in the Dawes campaign swings was the opposition to the Ku Klux Klan. This was a topic that he really tackled during his campaigning. I'm not going to go over all the specifics, but just to kind of note and point out a couple of those things. Such a stand was not popular in some circles at that time, but it indicated Dawes' independence and spirit of fairness. That's in regards to the Ku Klux Klan, bashing and such that Dawes did. Keeping cool with Coolidge was the order of the day. Neither the Democrats nor the progressives were able to lay the Harding scandals at the doors of Coolidge or Dawes. The voters affirmed their support for prosperity on November 5th of 1924 by providing a Republican landslide. Like I said, big-time landslide. Normally, the period between election and inauguration is one of speculation as the press and the public contemplate the new administration's direction. In those days, the vice president's role did not loom large in the considerations, but Vice President-elect Dawes made his wishes known. President Harding had established the practice of asking Vice President Coolidge to attend cabinet meetings. President by accident Coolidge had admitted that such exposure was helpful when he was unexpectedly thrust into the Oval Office. The Constitution itself makes no provision for a cabinet, let alone a role for the Vice President in attending. When faced with the prospect of being invited to attend cabinet meetings, Dawes rebelled in a very public and embarrassing manner. In his diary, Dawes wrote, "After my election, not knowing how Coolidge felt about it, I wrote him stating my views on the subject." He further explained, "Long before my election and before I had any thought that I would ever have an individual interest in the question, I said the plan was unwise. The cabinet and those who sit with it always should do so at the discretion and inclination of the president. Our Constitution so intended it. The relationship is confidential, and the selection of a confidant belongs to him who would be injured by the abuse of confidence, however unintentional. No precedent should be established which creates a different and arbitrary method of selection. Should I sit, the precedent might prove injurious to the country. With it fixed, some future president might face the embarrassing alternative of inviting one whom he regarded as unsuitable into his private conferences, or affronting him in the public eye by denying him what had been generally considered his right. My friendship and high respect for President Coolidge are such that it would be personally a pleasure to sit. But I will not do so because, in my judgment, it involves a wrong principle." Unexplainedly, Dawes did not write personally and privately to his superior to forestall an expected but non-existent invitation. Rather, he made his views known through a press interview on February 5th of 1925, as reported in the New York Times, even before the letter reached the president. The editorial pandemonium that resulted reflected no credit on the vice president, but increased the strain between the chief executive and his supposed right hand. Coolidge followed his custom of silence, so the controversy was one-sided, though prolonged. An assault on the rules of the Senate. At his swearing-in the Senate chamber in March of 1925, Dawes was called upon to deliver a brief inaugural address, a tradition that dated back to John Adams in 1789. What the audience heard, however, was far from traditional. As the Senate's new presiding officer, Dawes addressed himself to methods of effective procedure rather than any particular policies or programs. He then launched into an attack on the Senate rules, which, in their present form, place power in the hands of individuals to an extent, at times, subversive of the fundamental principles of free representative government. The rules of the Senate, he declared, ran contrary to the principles of constitutional government, and under these rules, the rights of the nation and of the American people have been overlooked. Dawes focused his attack on filibusters, which at that time were being carried out most frequently by the small band of progressive Republicans such as Robert La Follette Sr. and George Norris, who held the balance of power in the Senate. Dawes declared that Rule 22, which required a 2/3 majority of those present and voting to shut off debate, at times enables senators to consume in oratory those last precious minutes of a session needed for momentous decisions, thus placing great power in the hands of a minority of senators. Who would dare oppose changes in the rules necessary to ensure that the business of the United States should always be conducted in the interests of the nation and never be in danger of encountering a situation where one man or a minority of men might demand unreasonable concessions under threat of blocking the business of the government? He asked. Unless the rules were reformed, they would lessen the effectiveness, prestige, and dignity of the United States Senate. He insisted that reform in the present rules of the Senate is demanded not only by American public opinion, but I venture to say in the individual consciences of a majority of the members of the Senate itself. He concluded by appealing to senators' conscience and patriotism in correcting these defects in their rules. Since Dawes had not given advance copies of the speech to the press or anyone else, no one had anticipated his diatribe. In the audience, President Calvin Coolidge attempted indifference, but could not hide his discomfort. Dawes had managed to upstage the president's own inaugural address, which was to follow at ceremonies outside on the Capitol's East Front. As the senators proceeded to the inaugural platform, they talked of nothing else but their anger over Dawes' effrontery, making Coolidge's address anticlimactic. After the ceremony, Dawes compounded the ill will when he joined the president to ride back to the White House, instead of returning to the chamber to adjourn the Senate. In the Senate chamber, there was considerable confusion. Senator James A. Reed of Missouri noted that the Senate did not adjourn, nor did it recess. It simply broke up. Most senators were less than receptive to Dawes' advice. Dawes showed as little knowledge of the Senate's rules as he did good taste, snapped Democratic Minority Leader Joseph T. Robinson. It was exactly what should not have been said, added Robinson's colleague from Arkansas, Thaddeus Caraway. I regret that such occasion was perverted into a farce, complained Senator Claude Swanson of Virginia. I have an opinion of the spectacle, but do not care to express it, was George Norris's response, and Republican Majority Leader Charles Curtis declined to make any public comment on the vice president's remarks. But while the senators disapproved, columnist Mark Sullivan observed that the public was delighted. Sullivan described Dawes as a hero who had finally made a dent in that fine old encrusted senatorial tradition buttressed by antique rules and practices, and solemnly defended by conservative and radical senators alike. Beyond Dawes' public expression of constitutional qualms about the role of the vice president, his publications offer no insight about the further rationale behind his position, in regards to the cabinet meetings and that sort of thing. Reporters speculated about the hidden agenda. Among the best of these is the analysis presented by Arthur Sears Herring in the Chicago Tribune, November 27th of 1924, which listed these considerations. 1. As a potential presidential candidate in 1928, Dawes did not wish to be too closely associated with Coolidge's policies should there be a need to criticize them in the future. 2. Given Dawes' reputation for spontaneous expressions of views, Coolidge had no desire to upset the tranquility of his meetings with such a irascible competitor. 3, philosophical differences of opinion on such issues as agricultural subsidies and veterans' bonuses made Dawes unpopular in the Coolidge inner circle. And 4, lastly, practical experience had suggested to Coolidge that friction would be reduced if executive and legislative spheres remained separate. Whatever the real reason in the matter, the manner in which the issue had been aired served to strain relations between Dawes and Coolidge, and rarely has such an unwarranted slight been made to a president by a vice president. President Coolidge's comments in his autobiography in 1929 suggest that Dawes was not invited to sit with the cabinet because he was perceived to be both indiscreet and insubordinate. So a little bit more. The next clash between the federal government's two principals, of course, we just touched on, occurred on Inauguration Day, March 4th of 1925. Coolidge anticipated the day as the culmination of a 30-year career in public life and savored the opportunity to create an agenda, an atmosphere for his own administration. Dawes, on the other hand, saw the occasion of the other inauguration as an opportunity to bring his business-like approach to conducting the affairs of the U.S. Senate, over which he was to preside. Unfortunately, a blustery inaugural address from the new vice president overshadowed Coolidge's day in the sun. Never having held elective office or presided over a deliberative legislative body, the new Senate presiding officer endeavored to establish his leadership style. As you know, and then I'm not going to read any more about really what he said. You can always look that up. I'm sure it's public online. You can kind of read his inaugural address. For nearly 20 minutes, he vigorously and pungently attacked the rules conducive to filibustering. He concluded with the declaration that reform in the present rules is demanded not only by American public opinion, but I venture to say in the individual consciences of the majority of the members of the Senate itself. As presiding officer, Dawes considered it his duty to call attention to defective methods in the conduct of Senate business. Reporters noted an icy silence in the Senate chamber when Dawes finished his tirade. If the senators did not appreciate the tongue lashing about their archaic rules, the nation's reporters applauded the good copy Helen Maria Dawes had provided them. An irritated president. After upstaging the president on Inaugural Day, Dawes compounded his error by writing to inform Coolidge that he did not think the vice president should attend cabinet meetings. President Harding had invited Coolidge to cabinet meetings on a regular basis, but Dawes did not believe that Harding's action should necessarily set a precedent for future presidents. He took the initiative by declining even before Coolidge had offered him an invitation. This was done to relieve him, if he shared my views, of any embarrassment if he desired to carry them out, Dawes later explained. Notwithstanding the fact that he had accepted Harding's invitation, Dawes dismissed suggestions by the busybodies and mischief makers in Washington who imagined unpleasant relations between Coolidge and myself. What Coolidge thought is less certain. In his autobiography, Coolidge counted his experiences in the cabinet as being of supreme value to him when he became president, and suggested that the vice president should be invited to sit with the cabinet if he was a man of discretion and character, so that he can be relied upon to act as a subordinate in that position. The implication was that Dawes did not fit that description. In addition, Coolidge never mentioned Dawes by name in his memoirs. Coolidge also felt irritated over an incident that occurred on March 10th, only days after Dawes started presiding over the Senate. Up for debate was the president's nomination of Charles Warren to be Attorney General. In the wake of Teapot Dome and other business-related scandals, Democrats and progressive Republicans objected to the nomination because of Warren's close association with the Sugar Trust. At midday, 6 speakers were scheduled to address Warren's nomination. Desiring to return to his room at the Willard Hotel for a nap, Dawes consulted the majority and minority leaders, who assured him that no vote would be taken that afternoon. After Dawes left the Senate, however, all but one of the scheduled speakers decided against making formal remarks, and a vote was taken. When it became apparent that the vote would be tied, Republican leaders hastily called Dawes at the Willard. The roused vice president jumped in a taxi and sped toward the Capitol. But enough time intervened to persuade the only Democratic senator who had voted for Warren to switch his vote against him. By the time Dawes arrived, there was no longer a tie to break, and the nomination had failed by a single vote, the first such rejection in nearly 60 years. President Coolidge angrily held Dawes responsible for his most embarrassing legislative defeat, and the rest of Washington could not resist teasing the vice president over the incident. The Gridiron Club presented him with a 4-foot-high alarm clock, and Senator Norris read a parody of Sheridan's ride on the Senate floor. Hurrah, hurrah for Dawes! Hurrah, hurrah for this high-minded man! And when his statue is placed on high, under the dome of the Capitol sky, the great senatorial temple of fame, there with the glorious general's name, be it said, in letters both bold and bright, O Helen Maria, he has lost us the fight. During the ensuing 4 years, Dawes returned frequently to this efficiency theme in speeches and articles. While he viewed his attack on the cloture system with a sense of achievement, neither the Senate nor the public moved to make or demand changes. Excitement over the Dawes' declaration of war on the Senate rules continued as the president sent over a batch of administrative appointments for approval. When Coolidge named Attorney General Harlan Fiske Stone to the Supreme Court, he nominated Charles B. Warren of Michigan as his successor. Democrats and insurgent Republicans united to oppose the confirmation on the ground that Warren was too closely tied to the Sugar Trust, which would make him an unsuitable candidate to enforce the nation's laws against combinations in restraint of trade. The debate was long and fierce, occupying the first several days on the calendar of the new Congress. As presiding officer of the Senate, the vice president breaks tie votes, and on the average, a vice president exercises this privilege twice in a term. But on March 10th, the debate on the Warren appointment continued. Dawes was notified that at least 6 more senators wished to be heard on the issue that day, and after checking with both floor leaders, who assured him that no vote would be taken later that day, as we just said, Dawes went to the New Willard Hotel, which was then the home of vice presidents, and he took an after-lunch nap. In the Senate, however, the action quickened. Now, they believed that the savage assaults on Warren were having an impact, decided to press for an immediate vote. As the roll call progressed, it became apparent that the result would be close. E. Ross Bartley, the vice president's secretary, telephoned to request that Dawes return to the Senate in case there should be a tie. When the result was a 40-40 deadlock, the Republicans tried several parliamentary maneuvers to delay, but their efforts proved unavailing. The death blow was given when Lee S. Overman of North Carolina, the lone Democrat who had voted for confirmation, announced a change in his vote. By the time Dawes arrived in the chamber, there was no tie to break, and the vote now stood at 39 for confirmation and 41 against. And for the first time since Andrew Johnson's presidency, the Senate had rejected a cabinet appointment. Privately, Coolidge held Dawes accountable, but publicly he said nothing. In a rare show of temper and tenacity, Coolidge resubmitted the nomination 6 days later. This time Warren was rejected, 39 for and 46 against. Dawes never had the opportunity to make amends for his absence. Indeed, it may have been less than coincidence that Dawes was asleep at the switch. At the 1924 Republican Convention, the one vote in the Michigan delegation against Dawes and for Hoover was cast by Delegate Charles B. Warren. It is probably a curious happenstance, but reporters wondered if there was substance in the speculation. And as can be imagined, Dawes suffered considerable ridicule and embarrassment over his failure to be present to support the administration's nominee. The New Republic on March 25th of 1925 was more severe in its criticism. After describing the wild taxi ride up Pennsylvania Avenue, the editor concluded that it is extremely doubtful whether he will again be able to get himself taken seriously in political circles. Some wag added the indignity of hanging a sign on the Willard Hotel, "Dawes slept here." Within 5 months, the vice president had thrice placed himself beyond the pale when cooperation with the new administration was expected. It is little wonder that Dawes' 4 years as vice president are devoid of significant legislative or policy impact. Unlike his success as an administrator of great affairs, Dawes seemed ill-suited to the legislative halls. So as we always like to do, I like to take a look at the election that got the vice president elected into office. Of course, we're taking a look at the 1924 presidential election in the United States. We already went over like the inauguration and what happened there with Dawes, and Coolidge was angry. And then soon after they were in office, Dawes was caught napping, basically, all this stuff. So we already learned that. But now we're taking a look at the 1924 election that got them elected. Calvin Coolidge, of course, the Republican, and his running mate was CharlesGDawes. The Democrat was John W. Davis. His running mate was Charles W. Bryan. And then the Progressive Socialist Party was Robert M. La Follette, and his running mate was Burton K. Wheeler. And this was a butt-whooping, if there ever was. It was a landslide. The electoral vote count was 382 for Coolidge and Dawes, to the Democrats at 136 and the Progressives at 13. States carried. Coolidge and Dawes carried 35, Democrats 12, Progressives 1. As far as the popular vote count, 15.7 million for Coolidge and Dawes. It was 54% of the popular vote. It was a landslide. Coolidge and Dawes easily won this election. There wasn't any doubt about it. Of course, you're seeing some maps and some campaign posters and all that kind of stuff. That was the election of 1924 that got, of course, Calvin Coolidge was president. He was the incumbent, because don't forget, Calvin Coolidge took over for Warren Harding. He was Warren Harding's vice president, and then Harding died in office, so Coolidge took over. as VP. He took over as president. So Coolidge was the incumbent. He was already president. He got reelected in this election of 1924, and then Dawes was his running mate, and there it goes. That's the way the story goes, as they say. The election, 1924, Charles Dawes became the 30th Vice President of the United States. Stimulating a national debate. Dawes bore the criticism surprisingly well. He was never a man to shy away from controversy, and he enjoyed being at the center of attention. He also enjoyed occupying the vice president's room behind the Senate chamber, which he found impressive with its tall mahogany cabinet, Dolly Madison mirror, Rembrandt Peale portrait of Washington, and chandelier that once hung in the White House. When the Senate was not in session, large delegations of visitors would tour the corridor outside his office, and since the door was generally kept open for better ventilation, they would always stop and peek in. The senators, too, would stop and talk with the vice president, who took such an active interest in their rules and proceedings. But Dawes found it curious that conversation always seemed to get around to whether this or that senator will be willing to concede the right of way to this or that piece of general legislation as a measure of surpassing public importance. He remained convinced that by allowing unlimited debate, the Senate rules granted an intolerable power to the minority. Rather than cease his criticism, Dawes continued to seek public forums to denounce the Senate filibuster. During the summer recess in 1925, he toured the country addressing public meetings on the subject. He pointed out that filibusters flourished during the short sessions of Congress held between December and March following each congressional election, and that these protracted debates tied up critical appropriations bills until the majority would agree to fund some individual senator's pet project. He frequently cited a filibuster by Senator Benjamin Tillman that brought a $600,000 appropriation to South Carolina. Dawes praised the work of Senator Francis Warren, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and Reed Smoot, chairman of Finance. It is they and their like who perform most of the difficult, disagreeable, and necessary work, speaking only when they have something to say and accomplish. By contrast to such constructive senators, he had no use for legislative showmen, radicals, and filibusters. Dawes' campaign stimulated a national debate on the Senate rules. A significant rebuttal to his assertions came from the political scientist Lindsey Rogers, who argued that filibusters served a useful purpose. Too much legislation was hammered out in committees that met in secret, where powerful corporate interests held sway and where progressive reformers had little influence. Rogers pointed out that the powers of delay given individual senators force into pending bills some amendments that the Senate leaders would not accept were they free to act as they desired. He also pointed out that despite the filibuster, the Senate got a creditable amount of business done each session. Changing the rules would be inadvisable, since it would silence the minority and allow the majority to act unimpeded. Although the Senate did not change its rules during his vice presidency, Dawes noted with satisfaction that it invoked cloture more frequently than ever before. After 1917, when the cloture rule was first adopted, the Senate had voted to cut off debate on the Versailles Treaty in 1919, but failed to invoke cloture on tariff legislation in 1921 and 1922. During the 69th Congress, which ran from 1925 to 1927, the Senate cast 7 votes on cloture and 3 times gained the 2/3 majority sufficient to cut off filibusters. Not until the 93rd Congress from 1973 to 1975, after a rules change had reduced the majority needed to vote cloture from 2/3 to 3/5 of the members, did the Senate equal and surpass that number of successful cloture votes. Farm relief and banking reform. Dawes also personally intervened in other attempts to cut off debate, and his efforts led to the Senate's passage of bills that extended the Federal Reserve banks and would have provided farm relief. Agitation for farm relief became a pressing issue during the 1920s when American farmers were shut out of the general prosperity of the era. After the First World War, farm prices had fallen and never recovered. Members of Congress from Midwestern and Plains states therefore formed the Farm Bloc, consisting of some 25 senators and 100 representatives. Holding the balance of power in Congress, they promoted legislation to solve the problem of distributing surplus farm produce. Each year between 1924 and 1928, Senator Charles McNary of Oregon and Representative Gilbert Hogan of Iowa, both Republicans, sponsored the McNary-Hogan bill to permit the federal government to buy crop surpluses and sell them abroad, while at the same time maintaining a high tariff on the importation of farm goods. The result would have raised prices in the United States. Robert M. La Follette Jr., who had succeeded his late father in the Senate, led a filibuster against the McFadden-Pepper bill to extend the charters of the Federal Reserve banks. By holding up passage of the bank bill, La Follette sought to pressure the Senate to vote on the McNary-Hogan bill. The only way to break this logjam, as far as Dawes could see, was to form a coalition between the conservatives favoring the bank bill and certain radicals favoring the farm bill. The vice president intervened, calling representatives of both groups to a meeting in his room. One of the participants, Pennsylvania Senator George Wharton Pepper, commented that, by sheer force of his personality, Dawes forced an agreement that both measures should be voted upon. This agreement was carried out. Both bills passed. Pepper gave Dawes the chief credit for enacting these bills, as did Senator James E. Watson, the Indiana Republican, who would soon become majority leader. In the course of a speech on equalization fees, Watson noted, "This explanation of the equalization fee was prepared by the vice president, who is a supporter of the McNary-Hogan bill." Although Watson deleted this indiscretion from the congressional record, alert reporters in the press gallery had already publicized the statement. Dawes' interest in this legislation did not further endear him to President Coolidge, who twice vetoed the McNary-Hogan bills that his vice president had helped the Senate pass. Coolidge complained that the McNary-Hogan people have their headquarters in Dawes' chambers. Where the Dawes name figures prominently in the years 1925 to 1929, it frequently appears in opposition to administration stands. For example, Dawes favored the soldiers' bonus legislation, which Coolidge found it necessary to veto as an unprincipled raid on the federal treasury. The greatest source of irritation over policy arose over the plight of American farmers and the role of the federal government in providing relief. The Republican Party platform of 1924 had recognized that a farm problem existed and promised to study the issue to achieve a solution. Coolidge elected to ignore Dawes' recommendations for select committee membership to explore the issue. The farm bloc, meanwhile, rallied around the McNary-Haugen legislation as offering the best hope for relief from depressed prices due to surpluses. Without publicly proclaiming his assent to this particular legislation, Dawes gained a reputation for providing an office headquarters for proponents of parity prices and surplus disposal abroad. Basically, in short, with the McNary-Haugen bill, Coolidge did not appreciate the fact that he was forced to take a negative action on this political hot potato. He faulted the senators and Dawes for having passed the buck when the preferred legislation could have remained dormant in Congress. Dawes' usual conservatism on policy matters with budgetary implications was dampened when it came to matters affecting farmers and veterans. Expressing support for these two groups could prove beneficial if he had aspirations in 1928 to retain the vice presidency or to run for the presidency. An irksome job for a man of action. As a man of action, CharlesGDawes found the job of presiding over Senate debates at times rather irksome. He felt more comfortable in executive and administrative positions with specific objectives and well-defined authority and responsibilities. He preferred clear statements of fact to speeches that appealed to prejudice or emotion. As presiding officer, he enjoyed making decisions about rulings from the chair and took some pride in the fact that the Senate had never overturned one of his decisions, but he attributed much of his success to the Senate's young journal clerk, Charles Watkins. Watkins had studied the rules and compiled the Senate precedents, making himself the actual parliamentarian of the Senate. Senate precedents are almost always conflicting, and when Charlie Watkins gives me a choice of precedents to follow, I sometimes make my own decision. But it is chiefly upon his advice that I act. A decade later, Watkins became the Senate's first official parliamentarian, a post he held until his retirement in 1964. Dawes similarly bristled over the social requirements of the vice presidency, and as one Washington hostess, recorded, his social tactics, no less than his insubordination to the Senate, brought down blame upon him in Washington. Although he frequently dined out and entertained generously, it was always on his own terms. He would arrive late, leave early, and smoke his pipe at the dinner table. Dawes also disappointed Washington's social set. Lacking the stamina that Mrs. Thomas Marshall and Mrs. Calvin Coolidge had shown for attending a continuous procession of luncheons and receptions, Mrs. Dawes declined many invitations. She never seemed to enjoy presiding over the ladies of the Senate and looked visibly relieved when her guests departed. Yet even her critics conceded that her manner was sweet and gentle, her conversation cultured, and her dignity unimpeachable, providing a gentle counterpart to her Helen Maria husband. The vice president's estrangement from the president further shaded his social standing. As one Senate wife later confided, "I have always had a feeling, which many share, that a slightly different attitude on the part of the Coolidges might have done much to relieve the strain so far as the Dawes were concerned." In 1927, President Coolidge stunned the nation with his announcement that he did not choose to run for re-election the following year. Although pundits debated whether Coolidge wanted to accept a draft, his announcement opened a spirited campaign for the Republican presidential nomination. Although Dawes was frequently mentioned for the presidency, he announced that he was not a candidate and instead favored his longtime friend, Illinois Governor Frank Lowden. The nomination went instead to Commerce Secretary Herbert Hoover, whose supporters considered putting Dawes on their ticket as vice president. But President Coolidge let it be known that he would consider Dawes' nomination as a personal affront. Instead, the nod went to Senate Majority Leader Charles Curtis of Kansas. For the third straight time, the Republican ticket swept the national election. The presidential political picture for 1928 became both clearer and clouded when Coolidge announced on the 4th anniversary of his succession to the presidency that he did not choose to run in 1928. Political pundits were unclear whether he meant it or wished to be drafted for another term. In an interview long after the fact, Dawes told Chicago historian William T. Hutchinson that a man close to Coolidge had reported that the president ardently desired the nomination and was sore as a pup when the Republican convention bypassed him. Acting on this assumption, Dawes made little effort to seek the presidency himself, although he doubtless would have been willing to serve if nominated. In the 1928 Republican convention, Dawes received 4 votes, 1 from Illinois, 1 from Ohio, and 2 from Missouri, for president. He figured more prominently in the vice presidential selection because he was the incumbent. The inner circle at the convention agreed that Dawes should have a chance to qualify for the renomination. The principal sticking point was his attitude toward the resolution of the farm problem. With Hooverites dominating the convention, the GOP platform refused to endorse McNary Hoganism. Instead, there was a general palliative that appropriate but alternative relief measures would be sought. When questioned by the kingmakers on the issue, Dawes agreed that Coolidge's vetoes had probably shelved the opportunity to pass the McNary-Hogan principles for the next 4 years. When asked to make a public declaration to that effect, Dawes' hackles rose and he refused to abandon this farm relief measure. Thus his name was eliminated from the eligibles. The convention then turned to Hoover's rival, Charles Curtis, who had been most active in the Stop Hoover movement. After a term as presiding officer of the Senate, Dawes came to respect the institution in spite of its perceived flaws. As a valedictory summary of the role he had played, he wrote the following: "The office is what the man in it makes it, which applies to all public offices. The fact that the vice president in the Senate chamber cannot enter into debate is considered a disadvantage. Yet for that reason, he is removed from the temptation to indulge in the pitiable quest of that double objective so characteristic of many Senate speeches, the placating of general public opinion and of an opposing local constituency at the same time. For his prestige as a presiding officer, it is to his advantage that he neither votes nor speaks in the Senate chamber. Outside, his position as vice president gives him a hearing by the general public as wide as that accorded any senator. Other things being equal, if he lacks initiative, courage, or ideas, he of course will be submerged, but that is true also of a senator or any other parliamentary member. Whatever may be said to the contrary, as anyone discovers who occupies the office, the people hold in it great respect. While I shall serve 8 months more and make future mistakes, I see the prospect of closing my public career at least without discredit. The occupancy of a public office, unless decorated with public respect, is a curse to anyone. There were no future mistakes, though, so the self-assessment showed a credible record. A travesty upon good government. As Dawes' term of office approached its end, a senator told him how much the members of the Senate thought of him, adding, "But the Senate got very tired of you at the beginning of your service." And Dawes replied, "I should hate to think that the Senate was as tired of me at the beginning of my service as I am of the Senate at the end." At about this time, Dawes attended the annual Gridiron Dinner. He and his successor, Charles Curtis, were ordered to stand while the Dawes Decalogue, or the letter of self-made has been to his successor, was read, listing several commandments drawn from the depths of my experience. Don't steal the first page on Inauguration Day, and you may be invited to sit in the cabinet. Don't be afraid to criticize the Senate. You know how much it needs it. The public likes it, and the Senate thrives on it. Don't try to change the Senate rules. Don't buck the president if you want to stay more than 4 years. And don't do your sleeping in the daytime. Ironically, Dawes spent his last days in the Senate watching another filibuster, napping on the couch in his office, and responding when the quorum bells rang. When the Senate dispatched its sergeant-at-arms to arrest absent senators, Dawes considered listening to the profanity of the arrested senators as they were brought in, one of the few pleasant incidents of such proceedings. He noted with some dismay that the galleries were filled to watch the filibuster and grumbled that a travesty upon good government in the Senate is regarded as an amusement rivaling a picture show. In his farewell speech to the Senate on March 4th of 1929, Dawes reiterated his objections to the Senate rules, saying, "I take back nothing." Dawes had resigned as chairman of the board of the Central Trust Company of Illinois when he was elected vice president. After his term in Washington, he returned as honorary chairman when it merged to become the Central Republic Bank and Trust Company. He became chairman of a financial commission to the Dominican Republic and chairman of a committee to finance the exposition A Century of Progress, Chicago 1933. In April of 1929, President Hoover appointed Dawes U.S. Ambassador to Great Britain, a post he held until 1932. He was scheduled to head the American delegation to the World Disarmament Conference in Geneva, Switzerland, when President Hoover persuaded him to take charge of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which Congress had just created to assist corporations and banks in need of relief from the Great Depression. Dawes' national standing rose so high that some Republicans talked of dumping Vice President Curtis from the ticket in favor of Dawes as a rip-snorting, hell-raising candidate to boost Hoover's chances of re-election. Then, in June of 1932, Dawes abruptly resigned as chairman of the RFC. His own financial base, the Central Republic Bank of Chicago, was near collapse and required a $90 million loan from the RFC to keep it alive and to keep the entire Chicago banking structure from collapsing. Dawes had to resign to avoid a conflict of interest. Dawes, whose early career was shaken by the Panic of 1893, was now confronted by an even greater financial crisis, one that shook his natural self-confidence and ended whatever remaining political chances he might have had. Reporter Thomas L. Stokes met Dawes shortly after his resignation from the RFC and found him a dejected, dispirited man. Dawes was distributing a typewritten statement to the press predicting business improvement. That's all he had to say, wrote Stokes. He was manifestly uneasy and nervous, not the hail fellow, the Helen Maria I had known about Washington for several years. I wondered at the time what was wrong. Several days later, Stokes heard rumors about the shaky banking situation in Chicago and then about the RFC loan. Eventually, the Central Republic Bank was placed in receivership and liquidated. Dawes reorganized it as the City National Bank and Trust Company of Chicago and paid back the RFC loans. He remained associated with the bank until he died at the age of 85 on April 23rd of 1951. Historians have concluded that if Dawes was not really a leader, he acted like one. As vice president, he would not accept direction from the president, and whenever his views did coincide with Coolidge's, his lobbying on behalf of administration measures was more likely to hurt rather than help. Dawes' forthrightness and tactlessness incurred the anger of many senators. Although his bull-like integrity won Dawes recognition as an outstanding vice president, that quality antagonized the Coolidge administration more than aiding it. As for Dawes, he believed that the vice presidency is largely what the man in it makes it, and for his part, he made the most of it. Charles Gates Dawes' public service was not yet ended after his term as vice president. Toward the close of his vice presidential term, he'd accepted an invitation from President Horacio Vasquez of the Dominican Republic to serve as chairman of an economic commission that would study and revise that new republic's finances. This he did within a month with the aid of a team of U.S. experts. And then even before this task was concluded, President Hoover appointed Dawes as ambassador to Great Britain in April of 1929. In the court of St. James, he became involved in the preliminary discussions leading to the London Conference on Naval Limitation in 1930. After resigning this diplomatic post in 1932, Dawes became deeply involved in assuring the financial success of the Chicago World's Fair, known as the Century of Progress. The Hoover administration was not yet through with his services. Anti-depression measure, the Congress had established the RFC, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, in February of 1932. We just went into that, so we know all about that. During the 1930s and 40s, Dawes busied himself with several publications recounting his experiences, including Notes as a Vice President, a Journal of Reparations, a Journal as Ambassador to Great Britain, and a Journal of the McKinley Years. He served as chairman of the board for Chicago City National Bank and Trust Company from 1932 until his death in Evanston, Illinois, on April 23rd of 1951 at the age of 85. He was buried in Chicago's Rose Hill Cemetery, and with a certain irony, the year 1951 experienced a revival of his 1911 musical composition, Melody in a Major. Now with the lyrics and a new title, It's All in the Game, the song became one of the most popular of that year. Among historians and political scientists, the ranking and rating of presidents is a professional avocation, but similar attention has not been accorded vice presidents unless elevated to the Oval Office. The typical rating system ranges from great, near great, above average, and below average to failure. Based on the evidence, a rating of above average seems appropriate when restricting the judgment to the vice presidential years when Dawes exhibited a forceful, independent, and efficient spirit as the Senate's presiding officer. If his total career as author, banker, servant of 4 presidents, winner of a Nobel Peace Prize, and administrator par excellence were included, then the evaluation becomes near great. In the pantheon of vice presidents since 1789, Charles Gates Dawes stands among the luminaries. So the last couple things here, guys. Later life. Dawes served for nearly 2 decades as chairman of the board of City National from 1932 until his death. He died April 23rd of 1951 at his Evanston, Illinois home from coronary thrombosis at the age of 85. He is interred in Rose Hill Cemetery in Chicago, Illinois. Memberships: Dawes belonged to several military, hereditary, and veteran organizations. These included the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States, the Sons of the American Revolution, the General Society of Colonial Wars, and the American Legion. Dawes was also a member of the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company of Massachusetts from 1925 until his death in 1951. Honors: of course, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1925. A Chicago public school located at 3810 West 81st Place is named in his honor, as well as a public school in Evanston, Illinois at 440 Dodge Avenue, and Dawes Park at 1700 Sheridan Road, also in Evanston, Illinois. Military awards. He won the Distinguished Service Medal, the World War I Victory Medal, the Distinguished Service Medal, I said that. Foreign honors: Companion of the Order of the Bath for the United Kingdom, Commander of the Legion of Honor for France, Commander of the Order of Leopold in Belgium, and the Croix de Guerre with Palm for France, or Croix or Croix. Legacy: according to Annette Dunlap, Dawes was a self-made man who valued hard work and thriftiness, tempered with Christian generosity. He spent his life promoting solid Republican values of small government with restrained budgets. Franklin Roosevelt's philosophy of big government spending was anathema to him. In 1944, he bequeathed his lakeshore home in Evanston, Illinois, to Northwestern University for the Evanston Historical Society, later renamed the Evanston History Center. Dawes lived in the house until his death. The Dawes family continued to occupy it until the death of Mrs. Dawes in 1957. Since then, the Evanston History Center operates out of the house and manages it as a museum. It's designated a National Historic Landmark. The CharlesGDawes House is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And you're seeing that right now on your screen as I was just talking. The CharlesGDawes House there. That is in Evanston, Illinois. It's actually located at 225 Greenwood Street. I did not visit there. These pictures you're seeing are all stock photos. These are not photos that I took, all stock photos. But that is the CharlesGDawes house where he lived, and I believe actually where he died. So pretty cool stuff there in Evanston, Illinois. And also one other thing, there's actually a city called Alamosa, Colorado, and there is a landmark in Alamosa, Colorado. There is an American Legion building. I believe it was a theater at one point, the Rialto Theater, I believe was the name of it. But it's in Alamosa, Colorado. It's very cool because Charles Dawes actually laid one of the cornerstones to build this. building. And to build it, like I said, I believe it used to be a theater, the Rialto Theater. So these pictures also, stock photos, I did not visit that. But you can actually see the sign that says, laid by Charles G. Dawes on July 27th of 1925. So pretty cool. Another little cool legacy type thing of Dawes's, so pretty neat. And then last, of course, but not least, his gravesite there. As I said, it is in Chicago, Illinois. It is at the Rose Hill Cemetery in Chicago, Illinois. Pretty cool. I liked it. It's a big mausoleum, of course. Nothing super fancy about it. You know, my pictures, you're seeing a couple here. These are my pictures from my visit there. Rose Hill Cemetery. It's a big mausoleum. There's like a little lake pond behind it. And that's really it. You know, I'm pretty sure all of them are in there. I know his wife, Caro, she's in there with him. I believe his son is in there as well. The son that died, died of the swimming incident. He's also interred in there. So, I mean, it's pretty much his whole family in there in this mausoleum, the Dawes Mausoleum tomb there at the Rose Hill Cemetery in Chicago, Illinois. So, there you go, guys. The life, the legacy, vice presidency, death, and burial site gravesite of our 30th Vice President of the United States, Charles Gates Dawes. I hope you enjoyed this look. Thank you so much for everything, guys. The comments, the questions, keep them coming. The subscribes, thank you so much. All the support, can't thank you enough. Henry and I thank you so very much. And of course, like I said, stay tuned this Tuesday, March 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Special live stream. Our special guest, Howard, of Plotting Through the Presidents. Him and I will be talking lots of really fun and funny, wild presidential stories and much more. So stay tuned for that. And then, of course, next week, our next Vice Presidential Series installment. Of course. And yes, we're going to be taking a look at the 31st Vice President of the United States, Charles Curtis. Stay tuned for that. Also, lastly, stay tuned for bonus footage. You'll be able to see all of my photos from Charles Dawes' gravesite. So stay tuned for the bonus footage here. Thanks, guys. See you next week. Bye-bye now.